The suitcase hit the asphalt with a dull thud. Carmen was on her knees on the mansion's driveway while her adoptive mother screamed at her to never come back. Behind the lit windows, her adoptive siblings watched the scene without moving. 23 years of life in that family, erased in an instant. The reason? She had dared to tell the truth about who she really was. But as tears streamed down her face and the door closed forever, no one knew what would happen in the following hours. A private jet was about to land, and with it, her boyfriend, whom she had kept secret, and a person who would make everyone tremble. This is the story of how one night of desperation transformed into the most shocking revelation that family had ever lived through. Carmen Ruiz had always known she was different. Not because of her appearance, but because of something deeper she felt in her bones. The Valverde family had adopted her when she was 3 years old, after she was found abandoned in front of a hospital in Madrid. For 20 years, she had desperately tried to be the perfect daughter, to deserve that love which always felt conditional, always provisional. They lived in a mansion in La Moraleja, the most exclusive neighborhood in Madrid. Eduardo Valverde was a real estate businessman. His wife Isabel came from a fallen noble family, but was still obsessed with lineage and appearances. They had 2 biological children, Diego, 28, arrogant and spoiled, and Sofia, 25, beautiful but as cruel as her mother. Carmen had studied through sacrifice. She had graduated in economics with the highest grades. She worked 16 hours a day in the family business for practically nothing. She did everything they asked, but it was never enough. She would never be of their blood. That November night, everything exploded. During a formal dinner with potential investors, Isabel had made yet another venomous comment about how lucky Carmen was to have been rescued from the street. Diego had laughed, saying that at least now she was good for something, working for free for the company. Carmen had clenched her teeth as always. But then Sofia added that she wouldn't inherit anything anyway, that she was only there to serve. Something inside Carmen broke. For the first time in 20 years, she spoke up. She said she was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen in the house where she grew up, that she had given everything to that family without ever receiving a shred of true affection. And then she said what she should never have said. She had a boyfriend for 2 years whom she had kept secret because she knew they would never accept him. Not because he was poor or unsuitable, but because he was hers, something they didn't control. The silence that followed was terrifying. Eduardo turned red with rage. Isabel started screaming that she was ungrateful, that after everything they had done for her, she dared to rebel. Diego said she had always been a bastard without gratitude. And Sofia looked at her mother and said the words that sealed Carmen's fate: they should get rid of her. An hour later, Carmen was on the driveway with a suitcase. Isabel screamed that she was no longer welcome, that she shouldn't dare come back or call. Eduardo added that he would cancel her credit card and that she was out of the company. Diego laughed, saying that finally the house would be free of the shame of the foundling. The doors closed, the lights went out one by one. Carmen knelt on the cold asphalt, the overturned suitcase beside her, clothes scattered. She trembled, not only from the November cold but from the realization of being completely alone. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. There was only one person she could call. The only person who had loved her for who she really was. She dialed the number she knew by heart, but rarely used so as not to arouse suspicion. He answered after 2 rings. His voice was warm, worried. He asked what had happened. Carmen tried to speak, but the words were lost in sobs. She could only say that she had been kicked out, that she had nowhere to go. He didn't hesitate for a second. He told her to send him the exact location, not to move, that he was coming and would fix everything. His voice was calm, but underneath there was something new, something Carmen had never heard before, something that seemed like steel. Carmen sent the location and sat on the curb, her back against the wall of the mansion that was no longer her home. Her phone rang again. It was him. He told her it would take 3 hours, to hold on, and then he added something that left her confused. He had called some people, they would come too. He wanted the Valverdes to understand who they had messed with. Carmen didn't understand what he meant, but she didn't have the strength to ask. She wrapped herself in her coat and waited as Madrid, indifferent, continued living around her. 3 hours later, Carmen heard an unusual noise. It wasn't a normal car. It was deeper, more powerful. She looked up and saw a line of black SUVs with tinted windows turning onto the street. Neighbors started looking out their windows. The first SUV stopped in front of her. The door opened and Alejandro got out. But not the discreet man she knew. He wore a tailored suit. He moved with natural authority. There was something fierce in his eyes. He reached her, knelt down, and took her in his arms. Carmen cried against his chest as he whispered that it was over now, that she wouldn't suffer anymore. But Carmen pulled back, confused. She pointed at the SUVs, the men in black arranged like a military formation. She asked what was happening. Alejandro looked into her eyes. For 2 years, he had lied to her. His full name was Alejandro Mendoza. His father was Miguel Mendoza, the president of the government of Spain. He was the president's only son, a government consultant. He had only wanted to be a normal man with her. Carmen looked at him in disbelief. She thought he was delirious, but Alejandro showed her photos on his phone, him with his father at La Moncloa, at the White House, at the UN. For 2 years, she had been dating the president's son without knowing it. He explained that he had met her in a library far from Madrid. She didn't know who he was, and he had fallen in love with the way she looked at him, like a normal man. He was afraid everything would change if she knew the truth. Now that bubble had burst, and he was there with all the weight of who he was, ready to use it to protect her. Carmen asked what he planned to do. Alejandro smiled, but it wasn't gentle. He wanted the Valverdes to understand the mistake they had made. He wanted them to see who they had thrown out, and he wanted them to pay for every humiliation. At that moment, a man approached. The head of the presidential escort said everything was ready. The other guest was arriving. Carmen asked what guest. The man pointed to the sky. Carmen looked up and heard the noise of a helicopter. The windows of the mansions filled with incredulous faces. Alejandro took her hand. He said his father wanted to meet her. The president had insisted on coming when Alejandro told him what had happened. 5 minutes later, a limousine with Spanish flags stopped. Miguel Mendoza, the president of the government, got out. He approached with a determined step. He didn't have the formal air he had on television. He had the air of an angry father. He stopped in front of Carmen, put a hand on her shoulder, and said with a firm voice that no one would dare treat her badly ever again. He said his son had told him a lot about her. "Welcome to the family." Carmen burst into tears. For the first time in 23 years, someone was truly defending her. The president looked at the mansion. The lights had come back on. He smiled like a predator. It was time to pay a visit. The doorbell rang at 11:30 p.m. Eduardo opened it, annoyed, ready to dismiss whoever was bothering him, but the words died in his throat. The president of the government of Spain was at his door. Behind him were security men, and in the middle was Carmen, holding hands with Alejandro Mendoza. Eduardo paled. The president said in an icy tone that they needed to talk. Immediately. They entered the living room where Isabel, Diego, and Sofia were gathered. They turned and the scene paralyzed them. The president entered, followed by his escort, then Alejandro and Carmen. The agents positioned themselves along the walls. Isabel stammered something about what an honor. The president interrupted her, raising a hand. He wasn't there for pleasantries. His son had told him what happened, how they had treated Carmen, how they had thrown her out. Eduardo tried to defend himself. It was a private matter. The girl had limits. The president looked at him with contempt. What limits? He asked. He turned to Carmen and asked her to tell everything. Alejandro squeezed her hand. so Carmen told them. The 20 years of humiliations, the jokes about the foundling, the unpaid work, the constant comparisons. That night had been the last straw. As she spoke, the president listened. Isabel and her children tried to interrupt, but a look silenced them. When Carmen finished, the president asked Eduardo if it was true. Eduardo downplayed it. Misunderstandings. Diego said Carmen was exaggerating. Sofia said she was ungrateful. The president lost his patience. He said he had dedicated his life to guaranteeing dignity for every citizen, and now he discovered that these people had treated a girl like a servant for 20 years. He said he would open an investigation into their company. Every transaction, every contract. Their reputation would be destroyed. Isabel started crying. Diego paled. Eduardo raised his hands trying to calm things down, but the president wasn't finished. He asked Carmen if she wanted to press charges. State lawyers would take the case for free. Carmen looked at the family. She saw them for what they were, small, scared. She felt the rage of 20 years. But then she looked at Alejandro and the president, who were defending her. She said she didn't want to press charges. She just wanted them to leave her alone. And she wanted her things. The president nodded. He told Eduardo to bring everything. Diego practically ran upstairs. While they waited, the president asked about Eduardo's business. Real estate. The president said he remembered signing approvals for projects. It would be interesting to review those documents. The message was clear. Diego returned with suitcases and boxes. The agents took everything. Before leaving, the president turned. He said Carmen was no longer alone. She was someone he personally protected. If the Valverdes even dared to speak her name negatively, they would discover how ruthless a father could be. They left. Carmen looked back at the mansion. She felt no nostalgia, only relief. Alejandro put his arm around her shoulders. For the first time in 23 years, she was truly okay. The next day, Carmen woke up in a suite at the Ritz Madrid Hotel. For a moment, she felt disoriented. Then the memories hit her. Alejandro entered with a breakfast tray. Carmen asked what would happen now. She had no house, no job, nothing. Alejandro gently stopped her. She had him. She had his father. And they had a plan. The president wanted Carmen to stay in Madrid. He would find her a job in his team or elsewhere, an apartment. But above all, he wanted her and Alejandro to stop hiding. Carmen hesitated. Entering public life meant media exposure, photographers, loss of privacy. Alejandro said they had been together for 2 years. He was tired of hiding. He wanted everyone to know he loved her. That night, there was a private dinner at La Moncloa. The president welcomed her warmly. During dinner, he told her about his own difficult childhood. He said that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the one you are born into. Carmen was now part of his family. The president said that the following week there would be a charity event at the Teatro Real. He wanted Alejandro and Carmen to appear officially as a couple. It was time to make the relationship public. The following days were a whirlwind. Carmen moved into an apartment in the Salamanca district, a gift from the president. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Alejandro practically moved in with her. He also brought her something he had kept secret, a box of documents. In recent months, he had hired investigators to search for information about Carmen's past, about her real family. They opened the box together. Her biological mother had been a young woman who became pregnant at 17. Her family had disowned her. Knowing she was dying after childbirth, she left the newborn at the hospital with a letter. Carmen read the letter, crying. Her mother told her she loved her more than life itself, that she hoped someone would love her as she had been unable to. The investigator had also found relatives. An aunt who never knew of Carmen's existence. When she found out, she cried. She wanted to meet her. Carmen said yes. The night of the gala, at the Teatro Real, Madrid seemed to hold its breath. All the newspapers had announced that the president would be present with his son, but no one knew about the surprise. Carmen looked at herself in the mirror. She wore a dark blue evening gown, elegant and sober. She looked like a completely different person from the desperate girl on the curb 2 weeks earlier. Alejandro entered the room, already in his tuxedo. He stopped to look at her, and his face lit up. He told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Carmen blushed, but smiled. The car took them to the theater. Outside, there was a red carpet, photographers, cameras, blinding flashes. Carmen felt panic rise. Alejandro squeezed her hand and told her to breathe, that they would do it together. They got out of the car. The photographers started shooting wildly. Alejandro kept Carmen's hand clearly visible as they walked the red carpet. Journalists shouted questions. Who was that woman? Was she his girlfriend? How long had they been together? Alejandro stopped in front of the microphones. In a clear voice, he said he wanted to introduce someone very important, Carmen Ruiz, the woman he had loved for 2 years and with whom he planned a future. The flashes exploded, but Alejandro and Carmen didn't respond. They entered the theater where the president was waiting for them. He welcomed them with a warm smile. He hugged Carmen like a daughter. Then the 3 of them entered the presidential box together, under the eyes of hundreds of guests and dozens of cameras. During the intermission, many people approached. Some were sincerely curious, others opportunistic. But Carmen also noticed looks of contempt, whispers. She knew what they were saying. Who was this girl from nowhere? What did she want from the president's son? But then she saw something that chilled her blood. In a box on the other side of the theater were the Valverdes, Eduardo, Isabel, Diego, and Sofia. They had been invited as important benefactors. They were looking towards the presidential box with mixed expressions of shock, rage, and something like fear. Their eyes met across the theater. Carmen felt all the old fears return. But then Alejandro took her hand. The president put a hand on her shoulder, and she understood that she was no longer that helpless girl. She had a real family now, one that protected her. After the show, there was a reception. Carmen was walking next to Alejandro when she heard a voice she knew well. She turned and saw Isabel Valverde approaching with a fake smile. Isabel said, "What a surprise to see you here, in such company." Carmen didn't respond. Isabel continued in a honeyed voice, saying that perhaps they had reacted too quickly that night, that they were a family, and families argue but then forgive each other. Carmen looked her in the eyes. She said with a firm voice that they had never been a family. A family doesn't treat its children like servants. A family doesn't throw someone out onto the street. And now she wanted nothing to do with them. Isabel's expression changed. The fake smile disappeared. In a condescending voice, she said Carmen was getting above herself, not to forget where she came from. But before she could continue, the president appeared next to them. In an icy voice, he asked if there was a problem. Isabel paled and stammered that they were just talking. The president said he was glad, because he also wanted to talk to the Valverde family. Perhaps in his office the following week, to discuss some real estate projects that required review. Isabel understood the threat. She made a stiff bow and quickly walked away. Carmen looked at the president with gratitude. He smiled at her and said no one would dare bother her ever again. The evening continued, but Carmen didn't see the Valverdes again. They had disappeared quickly, probably terrified by the implications of the presidential threat. Towards midnight, as the reception was concluding, Alejandro led Carmen to a private balcony overlooking the city. Madrid shone beneath them, eternal and beautiful. He told her he had something to ask her. He knelt down and took out a small box. Carmen's hands flew to her mouth, already crying. Alejandro said he had waited 2 years for this moment, that he loved her more than anything in the world, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. He asked her to marry him. Carmen said yes through tears. Alejandro put the ring on her finger and kissed her as above them. The Madrid sky seemed to bless the moment. 6 months later, on a spring day in Madrid, Carmen sat in a quiet cafe in Malesana. She was waiting for someone she had wanted to meet her whole life. The door opened and a woman of about 50 entered, with brown hair streaked with gray and eyes that looked incredibly like Carmen's. Maria Sanchez, the aunt who never knew she existed. The two women looked at each other for a long moment. Then Maria crossed the cafe and hugged Carmen as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. Both cried, oblivious to the curious glances of other customers. They spent hours talking. Maria told her about her sister, about Carmen's mother. She had been a sweet and sensitive girl, too young to face the cruelty of her family. When she became pregnant, her parents practically imprisoned her, hid her like a shame. Maria was too young to understand then, but as an adult, she had searched for her sister for years. When she discovered she had died in childbirth, the pain was devastating, but no one had told her about the baby. Carmen listened to the story of her mother with a broken heart, but also with a strange peace. Her mother had loved her, had protected her in the only way she could. And now she had found a piece of that biological family that hadn't rejected her, but simply hadn't known of her existence. Maria told her there were other relatives who wanted to meet her, cousins, uncles, a real family who would welcome her with open arms. Carmen felt something heal inside her. She wasn't alone. She never really had been. The wedding of Carmen and Alejandro was the event of the year. They were married in a private ceremony at La Moncloa with only the closest relatives and dearest friends. Maria was there along with other members of Carmen's biological family. Everyone cried with joy. The president walked Carmen down the aisle, in the role her biological father should have had. When he gave her away to Alejandro, he whispered that he was proud of her. Carmen knew he wasn't speaking only as president, but as the father he had chosen to be. The Valverdes were not invited. Carmen learned that their company was facing difficulties. Not due to direct revenge, but because business has a way of going wrong when people discover the true character of those who run it. Eduardo had lost investors. His name had been tarnished not by the president's actions, but by his own actions which had finally come to light. Carmen felt no satisfaction in this. She felt only indifference. They were part of her past, and now the future shone brightly before her. 2 years later, Carmen and Alejandro had a daughter. They named her Ana Maria, in honor of Carmen's biological mother and the aunt who had welcomed her. The president held his granddaughter in his arms with tears of joy. Carmen looked at her daughter and made a silent promise. This girl would grow up knowing she was loved. Unconditionally, always. Not as a second choice or an act of charity, but as the center of a universe made of true love. Because Carmen had learned the most important lesson, family is not determined by blood or documents. It is determined by love, by choice, by showing every day that the other person matters. And as she held her daughter, surrounded by Alejandro, the president, Maria, and all those who truly loved her, Carmen understood that the circle was complete. She had been abandoned, rejected, thrown out, but through it all, she had found something more precious. She had found herself, and she had found a family that had chosen her as much as she had chosen them. 10 years after that night on the curb, Carmen Mendoza was unrecognizable from the desperate girl she had been. She worked as an ambassador for the rights of adopted children, using her position to change laws and protect those who had no voice. Her story had become a symbol of resilience. The Valverde family had disappeared from public life. The company had closed. They lived in an anonymity they would once have considered intolerable. Carmen felt no joy in this, only a sad awareness that people always reap what they sow, but she didn't look back. She looked forward, to her daughter growing up loved, to her husband who every day demonstrated what it truly means to love, to the president who had become the father she never had. And every time she passed by that mansion in La Moraleja, she no longer felt pain. she felt only gratitude. Because that terrible night had been the beginning of something wonderful. It had been the night she lost a fake family and found a real one. The private jet that had brought Alejandro and the president that night had been a symbol, but the true rescue had been love, and that never arrived with engines or escorts. It arrived silently, constant, unconditional, forever. Hit like if you believe that true family is the one that chooses you, not the one you are born into. Comment telling us about someone who made you feel part of a family when you weren't by blood. Share this story to remind us that sometimes losing everything is the beginning of finding what really matters. Subscribe for more stories that prove true love knows no limits. Sometimes life brings us to our knees on a cold curb, with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Sometimes the people who should love us turn their backs on us in our moment of need. But those dark nights are not the end of the story. They are just the point where the true story begins. When everything seems lost, when you have nothing left to lose, you find the courage to finally be yourself. And when you are truly yourself, you attract the right people. Carmen had to lose a fake family to find a real one. She had to hit rock bottom to understand how high she could fly. Her story reminds us that we are not defined by who rejects us, but by who chooses us. Not by the doors that are slammed in our faces, but by the ones that open when we least expect them. And that sometimes love really does arrive with a private jet and a president, but more often it arrives silently in the small, everyday choices of being there for someone, even when it's hard. True power is not a title or a position. True power is the ability to love without conditions, to welcome without judgment, to build a family with the heart and not with documents. Carmen found that power, and so can anyone who has the courage to seek it.